If you're familiar with strategy games, you've probably heard of Total War, a long-running series made by Creative Assembly that spans over 18 games, with Shogun Total War being the first and Total War 3 Kingdoms being the most recent. It's a highly acclaimed series that has sold over 20 million copies, and although it had a few misguided entries, many games in the series are regarded as some of the best strategy games out there, such as Rome, Medieval 2, and my personal favorites, Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2. But Nijo, you may ask, you said there are 18 games in the series so far, yet I only counted 14 games in the list you showed us. Why are you lying to us? When is this lying going to end? Well, don't worry, I'm not lying. See, there were 4 spin-off games that aren't really part of the main series. 2 of which are bite-sized strategy games that are nowhere near as good as the main games, and the third is a discontinued free-to-play multiplayer game that revolved around the real-time battle mode from the main series. Although these 3 don't play much like the main games, at least they're still considered strategy games. The 4th one, on the other hand, falls under a completely different genre and has next to nothing to do with the main series, save for a somewhat similar title scheme. Spartan Total Warrior, created by Creative Assembly and published by Sega. The game was released in 2005 on PS2, GameCube, and the original Xbox. It was a result of Creative Assembly's desire to win over the console gamers by making a Total War game on consoles. Unfortunately, consoles aren't well known for being the best platforms for strategy games, let alone games of the scale of Total War. Mike Simpson, Creative Assembly's director, told Eurogamer in an interview, "We couldn't fit a Total War battlefield with 10,000 guys into any of the consoles. It just doesn't work. You can't fit a gallon into a pint pot. It doesn't go." So instead of a strategy game, they went for a more conventional hack-and-slash game. So, was the game able to win over the console crowd? Or did the change in genre work against its goal rather than for it? Would the game be able to stand on its own? Or was it just not interesting enough to be its own thing? To answer these questions and more, let's dive right in. The game takes place in the year 300 BC. The Roman Empire has taken over the majority of Greece, and all that's left is the city of Sparta. We start off with King Leonidas speaking to the new recruits, one of which is the protagonist, a nameless orphan known only as Spartan. During Leonidas' speech, Ares, the god of war, speaks to the Spartan. He promises to help him uncover his past, and in return, the Spartan will deliver the vengeance Ares seeks. He sends the Spartan on task after task to retrieve weapons that would help them against the Roman invasion. The story is pretty generic, and the only thing that stood out is how ridiculous it is. It's clear that historical accuracy was not a priority. Not just because of the mythical characters that you meet and the mythical creatures you fight, even real-life characters have no business being alive at the same time as each other, or being alive in the year 300 BC. And the Romans didn't invade Greece till 146 BC. However, I can understand why they didn't care about historical accuracy. To quote lead designer Clive Grattan, "If it's historically accurate, one man isn't going to kill tens of thousands of people by the time you've finished. That's not really a realistic premise for a game." And I agree, but I feel like they didn't take enough liberties. Sure, the game has mythical creatures and characters, but I feel like there aren't enough of them. And most locations you visit are just normal locations. Greek cities, deserts, a Roman underground, the Trojan ruins, and so on. Even the enemies you fight are boring. Sure, you get to fight a Minotaur and a Hydra, but 90% of your enemies are just dudes. I feel like they should have taken more advantage of the source material. At least that would have made up for the boring story and awful ending. Spoiler alert, if you don't want the game's ending to be spoiled, you can skip to this part, but if I'm being honest, it's just not worth it. During the Spartans' quest, the Romans take advantage of Sparta's strongest warriors being absent and take over the city, thus officially taking over the entirety of Greece. That's when the Spartan and his friends decide to go after Emperor Tiberius himself. After finally getting to Tiberius and watching him kill himself like an idiot, Ares finally shows himself to the Spartan. Turns out, Ares was the one responsible for the Roman invasion in the first place. Apparently, one of Aphrodite's handmaids told Hephaestus about his wife's affair with Ares. This angered Ares so much that he killed the handmaid before being banished from Olympus. And because the other gods know how petty Ares can get, they knew that he'd try to kill the handmaid's son as well. So they hid him in Sparta and gave him superhuman strength to defend himself. That child is the Spartan. So in order to find and kill the handmaid's son, Ares manipulated Tiberius into invading Greece in order to force the Spartan out, since he would undoubtedly be recruited to fight because of his immortal strength. My biggest issue with this twist is Ares himself. Not only is he incredibly petty in this game, but he's also incredibly stupid. After finding the Spartan, he could have sent a monster to kill him, or he could have taken matters into his own hands. You know, like another Ares we know. But instead of killing him whilst he was still an unskilled recruit, he sends him on missions that only made him stronger and stronger. Has he been hanging out with Ganondorf lately? Also, why was Ares exiled? Was it because of the affair? If so, who cares? Aphrodite had many affairs with both immortals and mortals. Was it because he wronged Hephaestus? So what? No one in Olympus even likes the guy. Do you really think the gods that banished Hephaestus for being deformed would actually care if Ares wronged him? And why is Ares so lame in this game? Even the way he talks makes him sound like a spoiled brat. The writing in this game in general is pretty bad. The jokes were cringeworthy.
That was a perfectly serviceable building before you let that thing fall on it. I thought he'd be pleased.
Can't you tell? He is.
And the emotional scenes were unintentionally funny.
You Roman filth! He wasn't destined to die yet!
Correct again, Castor. Arise, Pollux. Your brother wants you back on your feet.
And for a plot this simple, there was a lot of unnecessary dialogue. You're a Spartan fighting the Roman Empire. We don't need that much exposition. And the villains are so generic, it's painful.
You done well, Spartan. I'm impressed. Really I am. I never would have believed one warrior could cause so much damage.
Especially Sejanus.
And that's where you played into my hands. You see, this little expedition provided me with a perfect diversion.
I swear, everything he says sounds like it was taken out of Villainy 101. The voice acting isn't making the writing any better.
Go to Troy? The four of us? Castor, Pollux, me, and... oh no. The girl...
At its best, it's bland and dry.
King Leonidas was right. The city is surrounded. The Roman arrows will darken the sun.
Good. We shall have our battle in the shade.
The Total War games aren't really known for having good voice acting.
Our men are running from the battlefield! Shameful display!
But at least it's funny and charming. In this game, on the other hand, there is no charm whatsoever.
Before I ruled, the Roman Empire's invasion of the free world, led by the Emperor Tiberius, mercilessly spread towards our land.
And I hate this scream. I recognize it from Xena Warrior Princess. And to hear it cut like this is pretty annoying. Not as annoying as this though.
Make it stop!
As for the music, I can honestly say that I don't like it. In fact, I kinda hate it. It really upsets me. Not necessarily because the music itself is bad, it just feels wrong. Have a listen and tell me if this sounds right to you. It doesn't fit the setting at all. When I play a game based on Greek mythology, this is the music I expect to hear. Not this. What's with the modern spin? It feels so out of place. What makes it worse is that the music was composed by Jeff Van Dyke, the same composer who wrote the music for a lot of Total War games, including Rome Total War, and Total War Shogun 2 Fall of the Samurai. Jeff is an excellent composer, and he usually does a very decent job at capturing the feel of the game's setting. So what happened here? As far as the visuals go, the game is a bit underwhelming. Most areas are either grey or brown, making every new location seem very dull and uninteresting. And for some reason, all the characters in this game have huge brows. Look at them! Every single character in this game is pissed. The graphics aren't really bad, they're just boring. The game was released in 2005, the same year that gave us Shadow of the Colossus, Resident Evil 4, Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones, and most importantly, God of War, another game based on Greek mythology. With all these beautiful games coming out in the same year on the same hardware, I can't help but feel that this game looks pretty underwhelming in comparison. To be fair though, none of the games I've mentioned have the sheer number of characters present on screen at one time this game has. Which brings us to gameplay. As I've mentioned before, this is a hack and slash game, and one of its biggest features is grand scale battles like this one, with dozens of enemies on screen at one time. Which is quite impressive visually, but pretty flawed gameplay-wise. More on that later though. Each level is divided into multiple sections, with each section having one or more goals to take care of. The game expects you to multitask a lot. For example, in this part, you need to protect this oil cauldron from enemy attacks, use said cauldron to kill enemy engineers trying to open the gates, and use the catapults whenever they're ready to attack this Roman Colossus. You need to keep an eye on all these objectives at all times, because if you fail one of them, you lose and will have to try again. I feel like this was done to simulate the multitasking necessary in strategy games, and for the most part these missions are fine. They aren't particularly fun or interesting though, and sometimes they can be very annoying. Take this part for example. You need to use these ballistas to kill as many Romans as you can before they reach the bridge, hold off any remaining Romans after the ballistas run out of ammo until the explosives are ready, and protect the prisoners you just rescued from the Roman camp. You'd think that you can focus on killing as many Romans as possible and then your allies would handle the ones that made it through, but no. They just watch the Romans slaughter the prisoners and keep screaming your ears out to come and save them. In this part, even though you're protecting the oil cauldron and using it to kill Roman engineers, you also need to use the catapults. Why can't they use it? They're already there. They can just shoot the Colossus and move on to the next catapult. And in this part, even though you're fighting off a horde of barbarians and you're protecting 2 silos, you also need to ring the bell for reinforcements. Why can't the reinforcements come automatically? Why does it have to be one more thing for me to worry about? Even elite allies like Castor rely on you to do the simplest things. Whenever he unlocks a lever, he expects you to pull it instead of doing it himself. This over-reliance on you would be hilarious if it wasn't so annoying. I especially hate how naggy they can get.
Let's go! Get this gate open! Open up! Let us out! Pull this lever so we can join the battle! Get this gate open! They're attacking the gate! Pull this lever so we can join the battle!
The king! He's under attack!
Anyway, these missions aren't particularly bad or anything, they're just not fun. And some of these missions are way too long, and if you fail, you have to do the whole thing over again. And sometimes a single area could have more than one section of a bigger mission, and once you finish a section, you reach a checkpoint. Problem is, if you've already used up the health and power shrines in said area, they don't replenish between checkpoints. So if you go to the next section with very little health, you're basically screwed. I'm at the final section and I'm stuck with only a sliver of health, with no health shrines available. So one hit and I have to do the whole thing over again. This is a very long level and it's really unfair that healing shrines don't replenish. Honestly, if it wasn't for playing this level legitimately without using any safe states because safe states are for losers, I wouldn't have been able to beat this level. Speaking of which, this game has a serious healing problem. Look at how much health you get when you pray at a healing shrine. This is ridiculous, it only barely refills half your health meter. Compare that to the amount of health you get from a healing chest in God of War. I feel like this game would have been better off as a linear brawler instead. It even does that thing beat-em-ups do where they show the name of the enemy you're attacking. However, that would require the combat to be good enough to carry the game, which it isn't. The devs wanted the game's combat to be more reaction-based rather than a simple button masher. They attempted to achieve that by making the enemies you face more challenging than just simple cannon fodder, and by giving you a wider range of weapons and moves you can use during combat. Having a high number of enemies and a complex and challenging combat system might sound like a good idea on paper. However, in practice, those two elements just don't go well together. For starters, when there are so many enemies around you, trying to catch incoming attacks gets pretty annoying. And the fact that you can only target and attack one enemy at a time, and your attacks don't affect anyone other than the enemy you're targeting, only makes matters worse. To target an enemy, you have to point the analog stick towards them whilst attacking. But with so many enemies around you, good luck targeting the one you wanted to target. There's nothing more annoying than wasting a special attack on the wrong enemy. I don't understand how the game has so many enemies around you, yet it gives you no reliable attacks for crowd control. As far as your basic attacks go, all you have is this sweeping attack, which is slightly weaker than your main attack, and it can't be chained, which makes it incredibly slower. Look at this. This looks like fun, right? Why have combos when you can just do this? It doesn't matter what weapon you use, none of them are good enough for crowd control. To be fair, you do have rage attacks and special attacks, which are quite effective against crowds. However, rage attacks require you to fill up your rage meter, and you can only do that by attacking enemies. So they're only helpful when you have enemies around you that are easy to hit. But when you're facing enemies that are very hard to hit, it's almost impossible to fill the meter up, as it keeps depleting if you don't continue attacking, making rage attacks unreliable. And special attacks consume power vials, and you only have 1, 2, or 3 of them, depending on your level. You can refill these vials either by absorbing blue orbs, which can be dropped by slain enemies, or by praying at a power shrine, which only refills 1 vial's worth of power. You can't get blue orbs if you can't kill enemies, and these power shrines are pretty scarce, so special attacks are also unreliable. Just to be clear, both rage attacks and special attacks are good additions and are genuinely satisfying to use. Problem is, because of how bad the normal attacks are, these attacks become a necessity rather than a helping hand. And since they're locked behind the game's broken combat, they're not enough to make the combat any better. If you look at a game like God of War, Kratos' magical attacks are satisfying to use, but so are his normal attacks and combos. The combat is fun and challenging, and that makes the special attacks all the sweeter. But if these attacks were the only viable way for crowd control, then what's the point of playing the game? And it's not like the combat is better for one-on-one fights, because it's not. Fighting any one of these enemies on their own is never fun. It's just tedious. Take the big ones with shields, for example. You can't hit them when their shields are up, which they almost always are. So you have to shield bash them first before hitting them. But when you shield bash them, they immediately raise their shields back up. so you'll only be able to get in 1 or 2 hits before they raise their shields again. The assassin ones keep rolling around, and when knocked down they immediately get back up, making it impossible to quick kill them. These fights are not fun. They're not challenging. They're just busy work. This issue is especially clear in boss fights. Most bosses in the game are just tougher versions of normal enemies. All these fights do is amplify the problems I have with the one-on-one fights in this game. Speaking of boss fights, they're not awful, but they're a bit boring. Most fights are against a simple boss surrounded by annoying enemies. There's absolutely no reason for these flamethrower enemies to be in this fight, other than to be annoying. The gimmicky ones are pretty bland and can get quite frustrating at times. The fight against Sejanus' undead dragon is incredibly dull, as you can only hit it with this laser cannon. You'll only be able to hit it once before it falls, then you need to wait for it to fly back up again. That's all you do. The fight against the Hydra is pretty awkward. First, you need to cut their heads off by hitting them when they lunge at you, which will result in this more often than not, because of their weird hitboxes. Then, you shoot their necks with a fire arrow, which is pretty clunky since you'll need to rely on the game's targeting mechanic, which, as I've mentioned before, is quite broken. Another spoiler alert. If you don't want to see the final boss fight, skip to this part. But the worst boss fight, by far, is the one against Ares. For some unknown reason, the devs decided to force a remarkably stupid gimmick on this fight. Ares cannot be hit with any of your special attacks. If you use Medusa's shield to petrify him, he'll just break out immediately. If you use the Spear of Achilles, which inflicts fire damage on anyone that tries to attack you, he'll just continue blocking till it runs out. Nothing you do will affect him in any significant way. There are special attacks that inflict some damage, but it's only slightly more than normal attacks. So your only option is to slowly chip away at his health using your normal attacks. You also can't roll behind him and attack him, because if you try, he'll just jump away. Needless to say, I didn't bother. If the game is going to take away the only fun that could be had with it, then what's the point of playing it? As far as I'm concerned, I've already beaten the game. I wish there was a way to level up your weapons and special powers, like in God of War. There is a leveling up system in this game, but it's completely pointless. All you do is apply a set number of tokens you get at the end of each mission to the 3 attributes you have. You level up once you max out all 3 attributes. You can only go up to level 3, the tokens don't enhance your attributes, only leveling up does, and you can't save tokens because if you don't manually apply them, the game does it for you. You have no say in this. You'll always be as strong as the game wants you to be at every specific mission. And that's Spartan Total Warrior. I don't know if I should be that hard on it, as it was the team's first hack and slash, and it does have some cool moments. Sadly, the game is just too mediocre and unremarkable. It's not an awful game, but it's definitely not an enjoyable one either. I can't imagine it having any luck winning over console gamers. If I've never played a Total War game, and this was my first interaction with the series, I would not have been encouraged to try the other Total War games. So if you want my advice, stay away from this game and go play an actual Total War game instead. The developers might not be that good with hack and slash games, however they make killer strategy ones. Anyway, that's all for this video. If you enjoyed it and would like to see more, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon. Pressing the like button wouldn't hurt either. And if you like this channel and you want to support it, you can do so on Patreon or Ko-fi.com. You can find the links in the description. Thank you for watching.